The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our MWF webinar. For those of you who are new with us today, our principal software, MWF, which stands for Metal Wood Framer, is our automated Revit wall, floor, ceiling, and truss framing software for light gauge steel and wood modeling. Today, our senior technician, Christina, will be doing an in-depth refresher on our metal software, covering everything in our wall module from template updates to shop drawing production. Just a few housekeeping items before we start. At the end of the webinar, we'll be taking a few live questions. To be selected, please press the raise hand button on the control panel. Also, please make sure that your computer audio is working. If you'd prefer, you can also ask questions throughout the webinar in the GoToWebinar dashboard under the Questions tab. Lastly, anyone who's registered for the webinar will be sent a recording automatically. All right, that's it for me. I'll hand off to Christina now.
All right, hey everyone. So for today's webinar, I thought we'd focus a little bit more on some of the automated options within the software. So I'm gonna basically kind of cover the template map. I thought we'd cover all the rule set options as well. And really just give you a refresher on those automated tools so you can automate most of the framing in your building and really use the software to its full potential. So as a refresher, again, we're going to start off with some pretty simple basic commands. I'm going to go ahead and create a panel in here in my dummy wall off to the side. And I'm going to do that with a template. So just, again, general refresher. The templates are basically what house your panel information, so your studs, the spacing. It's basically how you can use those to help automate the framing. So in this project here, I've got some templates set up for my exterior walls, some interior partition walls. I'm going to go ahead and select my 6-inch exterior wall, set that one as active, close out of here, and then say create. So again, that's just going to relay the information that's in the properties to my panel. So if you do want to do things like change out your stud spacing, maybe put in some extra options, if you want to put in some extra studs, add in some horizontals, that's something that you can achieve through this properties window, save to your template, and then apply that change throughout the project. So just a kind of little simple refresher on the workflow. But like I mentioned, one of the main things I really want to cover is some of the more automated options. So let's go ahead and jump to the template map. So for anyone who's not familiar with this, the template map works in tandem with the quick create command and actually lets you link the templates once they've been created to your Revit wall types. So these are just all the Revit wall types I have in my project, and I've got them linked up with those templates that we saw earlier. So once this map is activated, I have everything good to go. That's when you can go ahead, grab a wall, and use this quick create command. So because it's framing out according to that map, this is something that's going to enable you to mass select a bunch of walls in your project, say create, and it'll frame out regardless of what template you're using, save you from having to go into each individual wall and choose which one you want as active. So I'm going to jump back into my template map, and I'm also just going to show a little bit of this lock to template feature. So this is another feature I find particularly useful on maybe larger scale projects where you don't want to have to keep tabs on all your different types of walls. So with this lock to template option now selected, I can say OK. I can go ahead and same steps. Oops. There we go. Let me just go quickly change out my template. There we go. Okay, let's try that again, guys. There we go. That looks better. So I'll actually explain that error message in a little bit. It'll kind of lead up to my next topic that I want to cover. But for now, all I did was go ahead and say quick create. And this time my lock to template, like I mentioned, has been checked off. So what that basically enables, or disables I should say, is the user's ability to go into those walls and make any kind of manual changes or maybe one-off edits. So like I mentioned, it's a great tool if you want to basically lock walls in a large scale project and you don't want to have to keep tabs on every single one. They'll always be locked with your template. So this is where that dummy wall, kind of this separate wall I have off to the side of my main project, this is where that idea can come in handy. So if you do have to do any kind of large scale changes, you have access to go into your dummy wall. You can come in here, and the change that I'm going to do, I'll go ahead and change my spacing. It's a little large. So you can make any kind of necessary changes you want in here. Hit apply. And let's go ahead and update that template. So now that we can see that change in my dummy wall, I'm going to go ahead and regenerate these two walls that are locked. And again, because they're locked, as soon as I refresh, you can see I've got a bit more studs in here now. So it's updated with my current template settings. So I don't have to worry about keeping tabs on my walls and making sure they're always up to date. The other little feature I'll also bring up. Of course, if you do have to go into a particular wall, maybe add in some bracing, add in some blocking, or you just have to access the properties, and it's not something you want to update to your template and to all your walls, there is an edits feature in here, which is where you can lock and unlock the panel to the template. So I can lock it through here directly, or like I said, I can go ahead and unlock that, and I can gain access to its properties. So again, I particularly like this command. For large scale projects, you won't have to keep tabs on your walls. So now I'm going to go ahead and switch gears actually, and I did mention that one of the things we're going to cover are the rule sets. And I'm going to start off with the opening rule sets. So the rule sets for your openings are a super efficient way to frame out your doors, your windows, and link those rules to your template. So for those of you who aren't too familiar with these options in the panel's properties, the rule sets work in tandem with something called a marker. So these markers are basic configurations or data, I can say, that we load into the software. And these opening ones can dictate exactly that, how your openings are to be framed out. So if I go look at our default marker, you can see I've already kind of set this one up to have a 6-inch box header. But within this one marker, I can control how many kings I need on either side. I can control the sizes of those individual members. There's a bunch of different options for header and sill alignments, if need be. But again, what I just did with this one was turn that default into a box header. So I've got my basic bearing beam header here, type A configuration. And again, the sizes for each individual type of member, if I wanted a beam angle or a beam plate, it's all options that I can control through here and through the marker. So there are a few ways to apply these markers. But again, I'm going to cover probably the most automated way that we have, which is that rule set option. So to make the rules, you just have to save those rules to something called a rule set. So that lives in this same spot here in the marker manager. You can drop down the rule set. And then there's one here under the last option. So with any one of these rule sets or markers, we always give you a slew of defaults. But I just went ahead and duplicated that default, made one called opening rules. And then you can come in here, duplicate that. And I'm able to add in my rules. So these are the different framing conditions that you can base your rules around. So you've got options for windows, for doors. You can distinguish if it's a beam pocket or if it's just a plain Revit square opening. But for today's purposes, I'm going to stick with some pretty simple rules. I'm going to make one for a window and I'm going to make one for my door. So with the window option, there's a few different criteria type that you can use to basically apply filters that your rules can apply to. So the first one is, if you do want to create a rule, maybe for a specific window type, this is going to load in all of the different window types that you do have in the project. So you can pick any one of those family types. And then within these rules, you can even go so far as to filter it down to if it's that particular window, maybe on the first floor, in maybe a partition wall, a 4.5 partition wall. If I know that condition maybe needs a 4-inch box header, this is the type of rule that you can set up. And when that kind of condition is met, it'll automatically frame everything out. So I'm going to go a bit more generic with my rule, and I'm going to do this by width range. So instead of narrowing it down to a specific family type, I can basically put in some kind of range that says maybe in any window that's 4 to 8 feet wide. I'm also going to remove the level and wall type constraint. So it's really just going to be a pretty broad rule. And I'm going to go ahead and apply my 6-inch box header. So feel free to give your rule a name. So you can narrow it down after if you've got a pretty long list. But this is just the basics in getting your rules set up. So that's going to be a rule for my window. If I go ahead and switch to my door option, it's again pretty much the same options. You can do it by door type. You have the option to do it by height as well if need be. But let's go ahead and apply basically an identical rule. I'm going to apply the same box header for my doors. There we go. So now that I've got my rules set up, I can go ahead and save them to my rule set over here. The next step after that is just to apply them. So again, these guys are locked. So I'm going to go ahead and actually update this through my dummy wall. Doesn't matter that I don't have an opening in there. I'm just updating the general settings. And now I can come in here in my opening framing option and set it up to use my rule set. So now that I've got my rule set up, let's go ahead and update our template. And then all you have to do in your main walls, go ahead and hit regenerate, let that refresh, and we'll get our box headers. There we go. So I'll highlight that little error message I got before, just so you guys understand where that came from. But that was just because I had already set it in my template and I actually didn't have any rules set up. So doesn't know how to frame the openings without any kind of rules. And then that's where that angry little red error message came from. So if you are ever getting that when you're setting up your rules, don't worry, you can always go back in your rule set and just double check your constraints, make sure everything lines up. So again, the rule set option for openings, it's definitely a great tool if you don't want to have to keep tabs on all of your different opening types. And if you already have those rules set up at the beginning of the project, you just have to implement those in the software. Okay. So I'm going to switch gears and go to the next rule set, which is how you could actually set up joins so that everything, again, joins automatically without having to grab your walls per connection. So again, joins are a type of marker. So let's go back in that marker manager. You can see what types of joins that come out of the box. So you have some depending on the type of connection. Some can include backers. We've got for corners, T-intersections. So depending on the type of configuration you need, you can use these joins from out of the box, or they can always be custom created. So every one of these has their own little signature, J110, J104, just a way that we can identify them. And the rule set for joins, it's going to be in the same spot. We've got the option here, you can see for auto joining. Same steps. I've again duplicated my default one. And let's double click on my auto join. So you can already see I've got one set up in here for my corners. So let's set one up for the T-intersections. Now you'll notice there is an option here to add a new rule, but I prefer to add it through a command directly in the joins dropdown, and you'll see why in a bit. So there's this option in here in the joins to create an auto join rule. And I'm going to do this for a T-intersection again, so I just have that selected. And why I like doing it through this joins dropdown is because instead of just picking the signatures off of a list, I can actually see the image directly through here. So it's a bit less guesswork involved. You can see exactly which signature you're picking. So let's go with the J126. We'll save that to the auto join rule set. And what I do like about joining them through this drop down as well is that it'll automatically fill in all this information. So it automatically selects that it's a perpendicular T-intersection, and it'll automatically fill out my main walls as well. So my longer 4-inch steel wall here is my main wall, and my secondary one is the connecting wall, the 3 5/8. So if you did want to make a rule, again, can be very specific. So if you want to make rules depending on which wall types are joining at a T-intersection, then you can set this for any number of wall types. But I'm going to keep it a bit more broad, a bit more generic. So I'm going to click on this little house icon to set the wall type. And I'm actually going to leave this blank. So what that's going to do is not apply this for any 2 particular wall types. It's just going to be a broad rule anytime I have a T-intersection. So now that that's saved, if I actually want to join some walls together, I can join some corners at the same time. It's exactly kind of a similar workflow to Quick Create. I can highlight a bunch of joins, say auto join. Let's pick my rule set. And now I've automatically got these arrows wherever I have a wall join. And my corners are just using J104s. So again, once this is all said and done, I can go ahead, grab my walls, and actually frame this out. And the other thing I also want to highlight is I did join empty walls together. So depending on your workflow, you can do it at the very beginning of your project, get your walls joined together. And then when you actually go ahead and frame, you'll automatically get that configuration. But with joins, you do have that flexibility. If you do want to join walls that are already framed out. Let's go ahead and auto join. You can go ahead and do that too. And it'll automatically regenerate any existing panels as well. So again, I definitely recommend auto joining, especially for large projects. You can do it really in a few clicks and everything will be set up. As always, if you do have to change maybe one particular connection, you can always delete and then join a particular intersection if it needs something custom. But overall, you can really maybe do 80–90% of your joins by setting up that auto join rule. Okay. So last rule set I'm going to cover maybe might be the lesser known of the 3 rule set options. But there is an option to set up rule sets when you're using the interference tool and running any kind of wall coordination. So it's a rule set, so we're back in the same spot. And you'll notice I have one here called clash detection. And it's a similar idea to the openings in a sense. I've already got 2 rules set up by width range and by the type of category that's clashing. Depending on those, they'll get some type of marker. So I know I've got a pretty large duct right here, so I'm going to make a new rule for that. So I'll set this up again by a width range. And the other thing I do want to highlight with kind of when you're using these ranges, regardless if you're running it on a window or if you're doing it here in the clash, just a little common sense rule. Whenever you have a range, you'll notice I'm starting my next rule at 1'7", where my previous one ended at 1'6". So again, it's just a little common sense thing. If you do have a duct that's exactly 1'6", it's not going to know which rule to follow, and you'll get that nice angry red error message again. So if you are starting new rules, you can even put the precision as low to 1/16, as long as it's some kind of different value. So I set up my rule here to start at 1'7", going up to 3 feet. And I'm going to go ahead and add in the same clashing categories. So I've got ducts. And I also believe that some of these were registered as generic models once I brought them in Revit. So let's go ahead and add that just to make sure. And I'll also just highlight with this coordination, it doesn't just have to be MEP, you can do it for structural elements. As long as it's one of these options on the list, one of these categories, we can register that in the clash detection. And again, like anything else, you could make the rule very specific if you need to. If I also wanted to add an additional filter, if it was a particular size duct clashing with a particular wall, that's another rule that you can set up as well. So you can get very, very specific if you need to. So last two steps before I can okay this rule. Let's add some tolerances. So I can give it a bit of a rough opening. So these are just the tolerances on the left side, the right side. The image makes it pretty simple. And last step is just to pick the marker that you want to use. And for these guys, I'm just using a pretty simple variation of the default. It's just going to have a single header and a single sill. So with everything good to go, let's close out of here. And we can actually run our clash detection. So I just selected my link, the empty walls I want to clash with. And over here, this is where I have the option to pick which rule set I want to use. So let's go ahead and specify my clash detection one. And then this is going to run pretty quickly. I've got everything framed out, or everything punched out, I should say, with the Revit opening. The tolerances are also included to size that opening. And from here, I can go ahead and hit create, and it'll frame out this wall like any other panel. So for anyone who's coordinating or who has used the clash detection before, if you do have a large number of openings, it's definitely worth it to make a rule set, or else you're left stamping these openings one by one. And you'll get individual pop-ups for each opening if you want to put tolerances. So this is just a way to automate that whole process. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to cover to wrap up today is just to go over some of the new options in the shop drawing. And really the main thing I want to highlight, something that we've done since the last release, our new shop drawing engine, which is built up over here in the multi-layer window. This is now basically one cohesive engine, regardless if you have a multi-layer panel or if you have a single layer panel. So if you're adding cladding or just having the steel, you can basically have one list of view options, one set of settings, and there's separate tabs to distinguish the sheets. So if I go ahead and look at my multi-layer one, I've got a few extra options in here to include a sheathing list. I've got a section view as well. And just in my standard single layer one, so only drawings that have steel, it's just going to have your basic cut list, an elevation, and a plan view. So it's the same view. I didn't have to duplicate anything. And I can distinguish my sheet this way. So let's actually go ahead and throw in a multi-layer panel. Let's use my little dummy wall over here. There we go. Got some sheathing on one side. So with this, you can grab multi-layer panels, you can grab regular single-layer panels, and go ahead and just run the shop drawing engine for both. It'll generate both sets of drawings. And you're not going to have to distinguish between two different shop drawing options. I can maybe adjust my scale on this guy over here, but that's all good. There we go. So this is the basic single layer option. Everything's labeled out. And I've got my matching Revit schedule to go along with that. And if I go ahead and look at my multi-layer view, I've got the same options, but now I've also got my cut list over here. Or not my cut list, but my sheathing list rather. And I've also added that additional section view to distinguish between the layers. But if you're having a mix of both panels in the project, you can now at least set up one set and it'll be applicable regardless of what type of panel it is. So that's going to wrap it up for me on the new topics. Like Tanya mentioned, if there's any questions, feel free to raise your hand. I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Christina. As she mentioned, in order to pose a question live, please raise your hand now by clicking on the hand icon in the control panel. Please also make sure that your computer audio is working. We'll just wait a few seconds. While we wait, I'll just remind everyone that the webinar will be sent to everyone after I close the session. All right, well, I think that's a wrap for today. Once again, I want to thank Christina and thank you to everyone who registered for the webinar. Stay tuned. We'll also be having our next webinar next Wednesday, April 15th, and it will be covering MWF Pro Wood. All right, I'll now be ending the webinar. Thank you. Bye.